introduce Guy Armstrong. Guy has been a monk in Thailand for a year in 1982. He started sitting Vipassana retreats in 76. And I think most important is that currently he's a regular teacher at the February month-long retreat at Spirit Rock and has been doing that since 1999. He also has been a regular teacher at the IMS in Barre, Massachusetts, 3-month course since 1999. It's a long time for that regularity. And currently he's a guiding teacher at IMS and a governing teacher at Spirit Rock. What doesn't go on his list of his credits is that he's a friend to Dharma practitioners in San Diego. He's been coming down here, Catherine, do you know the first year? Since 1996 to the Buddhist Study Series. And many of us have come to know him through that or through retreats at the Spirit Rock, but I feel like he's really a special friend to those of us in San Diego because of the regularity of coming down here. And he's a wonderful person and a great Dharma teacher.
Thank you, Albie. That's hard to live up to. I have been coming to San Diego for a lot of years, and so I look around and see a lot of familiar faces here, which is a pleasure. The study series on the weekends was a familiar mode, and in the old days we used to do non-residential weekend retreats also. So I came for a number of those as well. But it's been great to have a connection with this community and with a lot of you as practitioners for a long time. So this evening, what I think we'll do is begin with a meditation of about 20 minutes. And before we start that, could I just ask, how many of you have a regular Vipassana practice at this point in your life? Okay, a lot. How many of you have practiced, who don't have a regular Vipassana practice, have practiced some kind of mindfulness meditation before? Yeah. So everybody's fairly familiar with almost everybody's fairly familiar with the basic territory. So I'm just going to give some simple instructions that we might give as part of a sequence of instructions in a Vipassana retreat. And in doing this, I want to kind of open up how we can pay attention to the whole range of our experience as we're sitting. So please sit comfortably. And in sitting comfortably, you want to strike a balance in your posture between really feeling relaxed. Everything in meditation wants to start from feeling relaxed, physically as much as you can, and also mentally. Let go of any pressure, forcing, expectation, just kind of letting things be as they are, having that be okay. And at the same time, with the relaxation, have your back be fairly straight. Not like somebody's put a steel rod up your spine, but so that you feel upright, so there's a sense of energy and also a sense of dignity in the way you sit. And when you feel you've found that posture that is comfortable but also upright, let your eyes gently close if that's comfortable for you. Normally in Vipassana we sit with our eyes gently closed. And then first just feel yourself in the sitting posture, in this moment, here and now. So as you're sitting, then beginning to pay attention to your direct experience in this moment, noticing what kinds of experiences you're having. There's the sense of your body, which we already talked about. You can feel yourself in the sitting posture. So just opening up in a receptive way to feel what that feels like, the act of sitting, being in the body, paying attention. And then we also notice there are sounds around us. Some steady kinds of background sounds, sounds from each other, sounds from outside, sound of my voice. The sounds and body are both existing in what you might call a field of our awareness. And as we have our attention in the present, we just notice both of these areas of experience, allow them to be just as they are. And you may also notice that you have some kind of mood in this moment. It could be a mood of curiosity, of interest, of ease, anxiety, skepticism. Whatever the mood is, just allowing that to be there as one more thing that we can notice in our direct experience. And then you may also notice that thoughts are coming and going. Thoughts could be about a lot of different things. In the process of insight meditation, we don't so much worry about what the thoughts are about. We don't need to go into the content, but we do notice that they come fairly regularly and go fairly regularly. So it's another part of our experience that we can pay attention to. We don't object to thoughts being there. We don't have the idea that, oh, if I was a good meditator, there wouldn't be any thoughts. Thoughts are just part of what the mind does. So the sense of the body, the sounds, the mood, and thoughts, all just part of what makes up your present moment experience. And all of that is fine from the point of view of meditation. We don't have to change anything about it. We don't have to make anything go away. And we don't have to try to make anything special happen. What we want to do is to be present, to notice it. So in meditation, it's not about creating a special experience, willing a special experience. Or wishing some experiences would go away. It's just about noticing how all these parts of our present moment experience come, last for a while, and go. And none of them is a problem. So this is the field for our sitting meditation practice. So we recognize that we start with a very wide open mind, open to all our experience, allowing of all our experience. And then from that wide open base, we can pay attention to some of the particulars as a way of sharpening the faculty of paying attention. And this faculty of paying attention is what we're going to call mindfulness. So we'll visit a few of these points again with a more refined attention. So opening first to sounds again. Having the sense that your awareness is very wide open. So it can take in all the sounds that are around you. Sounds to the front and back, to the right and left. Sounds above, any sounds below. As you're paying attention to sounds, notice if it takes any special effort to hear. Or, as you just rest where you are the sounds heard spontaneously? Could you imagine that you're in a concert hall and all the sounds around us are just part of some natural symphony? And by having a very open and receptive awareness, all the sounds are known just as they come and as they go. And then keeping that awareness open and relaxed, coming again into the experience of your body and sitting. You can still feel the uprightness of the posture. And also start to notice any other sensations that you find happening throughout the body. Letting the body be relaxed through the face and jaw. Relaxing the shoulders and arms. Letting the belly be soft. Having the sense that the trunk and head can just fall into the pelvis, supported by the pelvis. And relaxing through the thighs, calves, and feet. you sit mindful of the body's posture, have the sense that the awareness is filling the body. So that in any corner of the body you direct your attention to, you can know what's happening there. There may be a sensation, there may be an absence of sensation. But wherever you put the attention, from the head, back, chest and shoulders, arms and legs, attention is there. So as you sit with this relaxed attention throughout the body, start to notice what happens when there's an in-breath and what happens when there's an out-breath. How does it feel in the body to breathe in? How does it feel in the body to breathe out? In the same way as the attention was receptive hearing sounds, let the attention be receptive as you feel the breath. Just have a sense that the attention rests in the center of your body. And you just feel the body breathing in, feel the body breathing out. Not controlling the breath, just letting it come and go naturally, but seeing if it finds its own steady rhythm. The body knows how to breathe, and generally it knows how to breathe easily and comfortably. Just allowing the body to breathe, but you're present to feel each one in the body. Feeling the body breathing in, feeling the body breathing out. If you lose touch with the breath because the attention wanders into thinking or other experiences, don't worry about that. But when you notice that that's happened, notice the thought or other experience. Just again, return the attention in the body, feeling the breathing. And also notice the quality of mind when you're able to be present with the breath in a relaxed and receptive way. Not straining, not forcing, but present with ease, with attention, with awareness. This is the factor of mindfulness. It can be developed with the breath, with sounds, with the body, with moods, with thoughts. And with all of them, what we're really cultivating, bringing to life for ourselves, is this peaceful, present-oriented, relaxed fullness of awareness. Meets the freshness of our experience, moment after moment. Open and receptive, without agenda, without struggle. So any one of those instructions could be the basis for an entire period of meditation, could be the basis for an entire week of meditation. All can be developed and bring different kind of balances of mind depending on the object. But in each case, what we're really interested in is the faculty of mindfulness that develops this clear, easy relationship fully in the present moment. So I'll be suggested that I talk about the Dharma for a bit. So that's what I'd like to do next. And I'll go on this kind of monologue for a while, maybe about 45 minutes, and then we'll have some time at the end for discussion, questions, whatever might be in your minds by that time. And the subject that I'd like to talk about tonight is called Delighting in the Wholesome, because that's what the path of meditation is all about. There are these beautiful states of mind that we discover through meditating that lead to happiness, and that they're called wholesome not out of some moralistic stand, but because these are the things that lead to happiness for ourselves and for other people. And the path of meditation is about discovering and then finding ways to develop these states. It's very interesting. When I grew up, young man in this culture, I had no idea that there were ways to develop this thing called a mind. I didn't know that until I came into Buddhist meditation. But there are ways. We can start to understand the inner landscape of our minds, and then we find through meditation the tools to shape it. And the shaping is done in the direction what will lead to our happiness and the happiness of others. That's really what the path is about. So all of you who are involved in the path of meditation have discovered this. There is a way to make these states of mind more available to us, and therefore make happiness, contentment, peace, and ease more available to us throughout our lives. This doesn't come spontaneously. You can look at the world at large and see what comes spontaneously. It's not always a pretty picture. But these things can be developed if we make the right kind of effort. And this effort is in the direction of our happiness. I practiced with a lot of different teachers over the 40 years that I've been involved in Buddhist meditation. And one of the beings that impressed me the most was a Tibetan master named Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche. He was one of the great Dzogchen meditation masters of the past century. And when I met him, it was toward the end of his life. It was 1994, and he had a small monastery outside Kathmandu. And we would go for teachings in the morning from him. And he was sharing the Dzogchen lineage that he holds. And at the end of the time, we took refuge with him. We were all Vipassana practitioners, but it's okay to take refuge with a Tibetan as well. We're very ecumenical in that way. So he was a wonderful, inspiring master, so we wanted to take refuge with him. And when we took refuge, we each got a name, a Tibetan name. And the first part of the name was his given name, Urgyen. And the second part was a quality of mind that we were to be associated with. So my given name when I took refuge was Urgyen Tsondrul. Tsondrul is a Tibetan word that corresponds to our word virya, which many of you know, the Pali word for effort or energy. And so I was given the name Urgyen connected with effort. Sometimes it's called energy, but it's energy not just random, but directed toward the path. Well, the Tibetans have a way of understanding energy directed toward the path that I think is very beautiful. They call it delighting in the wholesome. So when we make effort dedicated to the path of meditation, what we are doing is renewing our delight in the wholesome. That's what our practice is about. That becomes what our life is about. So that's where we have the title of the talk this evening. And we're really all in this work together. Those of you who've been practicing meditation previously are already doing this. Your effort is directed in this way. Even the short time that we had tonight, the quality of mindfulness that we all brought forth is one of these very wholesome states. And I hope you would remind yourself or get a sense of how that feels, the ease, peace, and relaxation that the awareness brings into the moment. So, what are we directing our efforts toward? If we're generating wholesome states, what is it being directed toward? I've spent a lot of time on retreat in the past year. I had a sabbatical period from teaching, and I spent many months of that sabbatical on retreat. And retreats, in addition to deepening our practice a lot, they're also good places to step back in our lives and get a high-level view both of our life, what's the broad outline, where's it going, how are we feeling about the way it's going, what would we like to open up. They're also places to get a high-level view of where our practice is at. And in taking one of these high-level views of practice, I came up with a theory, you might say. So I'd like to share with you my theory and see if it's true for you. And what I came to see is that what I do in my meditation practice, and therefore what I tell other people to do as a meditation teacher, comes down to one of three things. Sometimes two might go together, but there are basically three things. So I'm just going to suggest this might be true and ask you to check out your own experience with your own practice and the teachings you hear to see if it's true. I'm going to say that everything we do or that teachers say in meditation is oriented to one of three goals. The first goal is to brighten the mind. That means to bring qualities into the mind that are so wholesome that they kind of light you up. So qualities of joy, of energy, of faith, of love, of compassion, all confidence, all these things light us up from within and make, I'd say they make the Dharma shine out through each of us. So brightening the mind is one of the main things we do with meditation practice. And it's a direct route to happiness. The second set of instructions that we give is to find inner peace. Of course, these two are not opposed. They support each other a lot. But a lot of the suffering in modern life, I think, is due to the fast-paced nature of our society, all the demands that are placed on us, and especially living in an urban environment, as I guess most of you do, that impacts the body in a way that our nervous systems get amped up above what's really comfortable, above what's really healthy for us as people, and it expresses itself through various kinds of stress, emotionally and physically. So finding a way through meditation to calm down this overactive nervous system, allow the racing thoughts to settle somewhat, and find within ourselves a reliable ground of peace is one of the great benefits that meditation has to offer. And then the third part is in the very title of the practice we do when we call it insight meditation. We're looking to develop insight, which is understanding about the way things are. How the mind works, how the body works, how the world is made up, what its characteristics are. Because if we don't understand the way things actually are, we're going to act out of delusion, and delusion leads onward to suffering. So, brighten the mind, find inner peace, and understand the way things are. These are the three aims of our meditation practice. These are the qualities that we can cultivate. Now, I think what's interesting is we can choose through our meditation choices which of these three we want to emphasize, and therefore how we want to shape our hearts and minds. So, again, I'm going to suggest something that I think is a little bit of a personal view and therefore a theory. It depends on what you want from life, how you want to practice. So in Buddhism, there are basically two courses that are open to us. One is what I would call normal human happiness. And it is what most of us aspire to when we come into Dharma practice, I believe. Normal human happiness is available without high degrees of realization. And for many of us, that may be the aim of why we're in meditation practice. And that can be fine. That can be a noble and very satisfying goal. Because when you look around the world at large, is there a surplus of human happiness on the planet? Not really. Is it a delight to meet a human being who is actually happy? Yeah. Those people make a great contribution to the welfare of all of us. They bring smiles into the world. They bring a sense of well-being. They bring a sense of confidence. So this is a very worthwhile aspiration. But the Buddhist path also offers another level of mind development, which I would call liberation. It could also be called enlightenment or awakening. And the liberation of heart is what the Buddha discovered, and then what he taught as the highest form of happiness that's possible. Now, generally, as I watch people going into Dharma practice, they start out from motivation number one. Normal human happiness, that would be a great achievement. And it is, truly, it's a great achievement. And as they get more of a taste of the promise of the Dharma and what's potential, their aspiration often grows. Oh, if this much is possible, how much more is possible? And if the Buddha talked about ways to bring regular happiness, but he says there's an even greater kind of happiness available, maybe I'll check that out too. Maybe that would be interesting to know about too. So in the talk this evening, I want to explore the ways to both of these levels of practice and happiness. So I will say that when we start going down the path of liberation, if we follow it to the end, normal human happiness will come. It comes as a byproduct. But if you don't feel like going all the way down the path of liberation, normal human happiness can be reached at a sooner point than that. And so if your practice is aimed toward one or both of those are fine, and there are ways to practice to aim for that. Okay. So the first one I want to talk about is brightening the mind, because I think that brightening the mind is basically the path to normal human happiness. Brightening the mind is what leads to qualities like joy, energy, trust, confidence, love, compassion, so on. So, what if our aim is normal human happiness? How should we practice? So the Buddha talked about 3 things he called the bases for meritorious action. And what this means is ways to bring wholesome qualities into the world and into ourselves. And he said there are 3 kinds of activities that are the bases for meritorious action. And these activities that he described, he said these activities lead to what is desirable, wished for, dear, and agreeable. Isn't that amazing that we have the option to create in our lives outcomes that are what we wish for, that are dear, and that are agreeable to us? We have that possibility through practice. So, the basic summation of these 3 bases of meritorious action are generosity, good conduct, and mental development, particularly in this case of the quality of loving kindness. It is kindness that reaches out and includes all the beings that we meet. The Pali words for these, generosity is referred to as dana, good conduct is referred to as sila, and the development of loving kindness is referred to as metta. So what I'm going to suggest is that the practices of generosity, conduct, and loving kindness can bring normal human happiness. And they are sufficient if developed enough. So I'll talk about these one by one. Generosity is one of the key wholesome qualities in the Buddhist teachings. In fact, it's said that when the Buddha first started to teach lay people about the Dharma, he would start talking about generosity because it's a foundation. So generosity, the act of giving, is something that gives happiness to others. But what we often don't appreciate is the happiness it brings to ourselves. Think about a time that you did something generous and really thoughtful for somebody else. How did you feel doing that? Did the mind become bright when you did that? And when you think about it now, does your mind brighten when you reflect, the happiness that it brought the other person, the happiness that it brings you? So generosity is something that brightens the mind in the doing of it and in the remembering of it. If you hang around a Buddhist community very long, you'll see these extraordinary acts of generosity because it's one of the principles that our culture is built on, Buddhist culture is built on. So it's fantastic to go to countries where this has become a value over hundreds, if not thousands of years, and see the expression of it in those cultures. So a few years ago, I wanted to be a monk again. I'd been a monk in Thailand for a year. I'd left because of certain conditions, and the taste of it hadn't quite filled me up. And I'd always wanted to go back and renew the commitment to the robes and live again as a monk. So I had an opportunity some years ago to go to Burma and practice with a teacher that I wanted to learn from named Pa Auk Sayadaw. He's a world-renowned meditation master, especially for concentration. He had a monastery in the southeast of Burma. So I went there. I got there about 5 p.m. on one day. I went up to meet him and introduced myself. And at our first meeting, I said, Sayadaw, I would really like to take robes again. I've been a monk before, and I would like to do it again while I'm practicing with you. Would that be possible? He said, oh, you've been a monk before? I said, yeah. He said, okay. So the next morning, before lunch, one of the lay people drove me into the nearby town. I bought my robes and bowl, which is really all you need to start your life as a monk. Came back, and right after lunch was taken by some novices who shaved my hair off. And then I changed into the robes and gave them my lay clothes, and we put those away for the 6 weeks that I was there. And all of a sudden, I was a monk again. 5 p.m. the day before, I arrived as a layman. 1 p.m. the next day, my hair was gone, and I was wearing the orange robes. So it was a little bit of a culture shock. I hadn't been in Burma very long, and now my head was shaved, and I was taking 227 precepts. Okay. I arrived at the beginning of what's called the Rains Retreat in Burma. The Rains Retreats are the time in Asia of the monsoon. The monks were told to stay settled in one place so they didn't tromp through the rice fields and ruin the crops. So in the Rains Retreats, the monks and the nuns also stay settled, usually in a monastery, for the next 3 months. So I arrived at the start of the Rains Retreat, and that should have given me a clue. It started raining the next day. And it hardly stopped for the first 2 weeks of the Rains Retreat. And I'm used to rain living in Northern California. I think it was raining about 3 inches a day for those 2 weeks. My belt was soon full of mold. My lay clothes were in my kuti at the back, and my belt was just molding. The meditation hall was a 15-minute walk uphill, and I had to go there about 6 times a day for sittings through the pouring rain. The practice was very challenging. We didn't have the wide-open, expansive approach that I opened tonight with. We were told to focus on the contact of the breath at the upper lip for every waking moment of the day. Sitting, walking, meals, whatever. I went and asked Sayadaw one time, but what if I have hindrances? What if I have, desire or ill will or something like that? Or I get sleepy. What do I do then? He said, if you're sleepy, pull your earlobes. If you're feeling ill will, do metta. That was the extent of the instruction on emotions. So it was a very limited focus for mindfulness. Keep coming back again and again. The schedule was challenging. Shortest sitting was an hour and a half. Longest sitting was 2 hours of the day. My hut, I had a little hut to myself, which was great. The biggest spider I have ever seen was building a web right outside my door, and he was brightly colored. And then I was having a little trouble remembering how to tie the robes. I hadn't done it for a lot of years, and I don't know if you've looked at monks' robes when they're unwrapped, but they're basically just a big sheet. And from that, you learn how to wrap it around yourself, and one end of it becomes a sleeve that covers your left arm, and then you tuck a part of it under it so it doesn't come unraveled. And hopefully there's a big roll on your left shoulder that doesn't fall off, and under your sleeve. But I was having trouble readjusting. It was raining. The practice was very difficult. The meditation was not going great. It was okay, but it wasn't going great. Spiders, bugs, 1 meal a day. So I was eating 1 meal a day, which was lunch, basically white rice and stir-fried vegetables, and I was losing half a pound a day while I was there. And this all kind of came together one day. I'd gone down to the dining hall to get lunch, and I was going back to my cottage to eat. And I was walking down the path, my robe and sleeve, in my left arm, while I was balancing my hot begging bowl with the rice on the bottom, and the lid held a little bit of dessert balanced on the top. It was raining like crazy, so my right hand was holding an umbrella. I was walking up this muddy path back to my kuti, and my robe started to come off my left shoulder. And a few Burmese lay people were kneeling by the side of the path to bow to me, because that's what Burmese people do when a monk is going by. And I was just trying to maintain enough dignity that they wouldn't, gasp at trying to bow to a Western monk who doesn't know what he's doing. So this was kind of the culmination of it. And I went into a period where things seemed very difficult to me. All the conditions were as hard as any I'd ever practiced with, and they were all coming at the same time. And my confidence got low, my spirits got low. I felt very discouraged at that point. And I couldn't really talk to Sayadaw about emotions because he told me, So what to do? So I had with me a photograph of the Dalai Lama, who's always been a great inspiration, one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met. And I went to the photograph with a real sincere wish to learn something. And so I kind of supplicated, and I said, Your Holiness, do you have any advice for me? And it was very interesting because immediately an answer came. And it came in his exact voice, that sometimes high-pitched kind of Indian accented English that he has. It was definitely his voice. And it said yes. It said, stay cheerful, optimistic, and confident. A positive attitude is the best support. And then the transmission just ended. But basically what he was telling me was to brighten my mind. If you're feeling discouraged, if you're feeling doubt, if you're going through a hard time, recall what it is to brighten the mind. When I could remember what that felt like, being cheerful, this was very helpful advice. Sometimes I couldn't remember what being cheerful sounded like, what felt like. But when would you ever not want to be cheerful, optimistic, and confident? Right? It just fits. It makes sense. So, this is a roundabout way of saying that I was inspired by the Burmese culture and their practice of generosity. It was feeding me every day. It's one of the poorest countries on the face of the earth. It's actually rich in natural resources. Used to be the main rice exporter in Southeast Asia. But the military dictatorship has really skimmed off the profits, and the people are very poor. Yet, when I arrived at the monastery, I had a gift from a supporter in the West. And I went to the clerk of the monastery before I ordained and said, this friend in the West wants to offer some money, and she would like to offer a lunch to everyone in the monastery. There were 750 people practicing in this monastery, about 400 monks, 150 nuns, and the rest laymen and laywomen. We'd like to offer a lunch with this donation. Could we do that? He said, oh, I'm very sorry. All the lunches have been spoken for the next 3 months. Meaning Burmese lay people had already subscribed and pledged to pay for the meal to be offered to all 750 people for 3 months ahead. And that was just such a beautiful instance of generosity. So we would come down for lunch every day. The name of the donors for that day would be written on a whiteboard right by the meal, in Burmese and in English, so I could always read it. And then generally the people who had given the money for that day were at the monastery so they could watch the meal being offered. So this long line of monks and then nuns and lay people would go through and receive the offering. Often it was a family. Sometimes it was like a whole little village who would have pooled their money to make this offering, and they would come to the monastery wearing their best clothes to watch it being offered, and their faces were so happy as they watched all the community being served with their generosity, with their donation. It was a beautiful thing to see and very inspiring. So this is the practice of generosity. From a Dharma point of view, we understand that this kind of represents the closed hand of grasping. As you know, grasping is the main source of suffering, holding on too tight out of self-centered interest. It's undone by this, which represents the open hand of generosity. So in a very direct way, generosity undoes grasping and therefore undoes suffering. And you can also see, just as you think about a generous act, you have to reflect on what the person needs. So you're already thinking beyond yourself and opening up with compassion and empathy. So generosity is a very powerful way of brightening the mind, brightening the heart. Then another of these keys the Buddha pointed to, good conduct, sometimes called ethical conduct or virtue. The Pali word is sila. There's no word in English that quite translates it. Virtue sounds a little Victorian. Ethical sounds like it comes out of a philosophy class. There's just careful conduct, being kind in the way we relate to people. So as lay people, we have 5 basic precepts we try to follow that give us guidelines for proper conduct. Not killing living beings, not taking what isn't freely offered, not using our sexual energy in ways that harms ourselves or others, not speaking what isn't true, and not indulging in intoxicants and alcohol to the point of heedlessness. So as we follow these guidelines, we find that our life comes more and more into harmony. We're less and less in conflict with those around us. And that really helps the mind to feel glad also. So we benefit from having these precepts because the forces are still at work in our minds and hearts that will lead us to break them, to kill beings, or take what isn't given, or say unkind or untrue things. The precepts remind us, wait a second, before we act on that, hold on, reflect, and do what's skillful. So the precepts are very helpful for restraining these tendencies that can cause harm. So, is the purpose of the precepts for other people or for ourselves? Or both? It's really for both, isn't it? We protect others, but in doing that, we also protect ourselves. Not only do we protect ourselves, but we give a foundation for happiness. The Buddha put it this way. He said, the purpose of good conduct is for freedom from remorse. We don't look back over our conduct with regret. The purpose of freedom from remorse is for gladness. And then he goes on, the purpose of gladness is so that the mind can settle. The mind can settle is for the purpose of seeing things as they are. The purpose of seeing things as they are is for understanding and liberation. So this is all in the service of benefit to ourselves. The third way we talked about was developing the quality of loving kindness, or metta, as it's known in Pali. And there are formal practices for this. We, in our particular school, we recite phrases that incline the mind to caring for the welfare of ourselves and others. By doing that kind of practice again and again and again, we can develop a very strong quality of loving kindness, caring for ourselves and others. And what's interesting about this, we also ask, is this practice one that benefits others or ourselves? And again, it's both. When we develop caring for others, we act with more compassion and generosity to them. But at the same time, what's really interesting and what I think the West hasn't promoted very well, or maybe hasn't understood very well, is that it's very fulfilling to have that attitude of care for other people. The quality of loving kindness itself is a fulfilling way to be. And as we develop it within ourselves, we find, oh, that warmth is a delight. That warmth and caring for others brightens the mind, brightens the heart, and brings its own kind of happiness. So all these practices serve to brighten the mind. Generosity, careful conduct, loving kindness. And I think what's interesting is that these are all relational practices. Generosity, gives to somebody, care about what we do toward others, and the loving kindness, caring for others' welfare. They're all relational practices. And so we find that our happiness is tied up with our relations with others. And as those come to be harmonious and open-hearted, benefits them and it benefits us both. And these practices, of course, they're not just Buddhist. You look in all the great religions of the world, and these are stressed. Generosity, conduct, love. These are there everywhere. So they're not just practices for Buddhists, they're practices for human beings and human happiness. You know, it's kind of interesting. Steve Kerr is the coach of the Golden State Warriors. Have to do a little hometown bragging. Who just finished the regular season at 73-9, NBA record for all time. And this is what Kerr said. This is from an article in the New York Times this spring. He said, "The 4 values I try to instill in the team are joy, mindfulness, compassion, and competition." He can leave out loving kindness. That's okay. I thought he was channeling James Barras when he started on this. But that's why these practices are becoming so widespread. If they work on a basketball team, they work for everybody. They work in hospitals, they work in prisons, they work in schools. This teaching of mindfulness and also metta, we don't hear as much about it, and also compassion is getting very widespread through the culture today. It's almost like mindfulness is the new yoga, right? In the 90s, it was all about yoga going mainstream. Now it's all about mindfulness going mainstream. So I think these are keys to human happiness, normal human happiness. Then, if you choose, there's this other level of development toward liberation. And liberation teachings are based on these 2 principles of inner peace and insight. In the tradition, these are called samatha and vipassana. These go together. So samatha is what calms the mind, and from the calmness of mind, clarity comes that lets us see the way things are. So I want to just talk about 2 points in particular. The whole Eightfold Path of Buddhism leads onward to liberation. It leads onward to this highest happiness, also called nibbana. And just to give a formal description of it, the culmination of the path that Buddhism offers is the ending in the mind of the forces of greed, of hatred, and of confusion. And the Buddha said, and many people have verified this since, it is possible for these forces to be uprooted from the human mind, not to occur again. And this is what the Buddha said is the greatest happiness. You know, imagine if all these restless, self-centered stirrings were simply not there, and the mind dwelt in a state of stable peace, love, and compassion. This is the promise of the path. So, the whole Eightfold Path, with its teachings of wisdom, conduct, and meditation, points just in this direction. That's where it's headed. But I want to talk about two of these factors just briefly to symbolize this path of liberation. And one of them is the factor right concentration. In Pali, the words are samma samadhi. The concentration is that quality of mind when you're in the present moment and you can stay with a few breaths in a row. Maybe you've had that experience sometimes in a meditation. It's a little rare, but sometimes it happens. You can be with a few breaths in a row, and at that time, you start to feel, oh, the mind is steady. The attention is steady in this moment. And as you start to feel into what that's like, you feel there's a strength that comes to the mind when it's steady like that. And there's a satisfaction of being present without being tossed about by restless thinking and distracting emotions. So this quality of concentration is very inherently fulfilling. As it settles, we start to feel, oh, this is how I'd like to be. This is how I'd like to live. This is the start of peace. This is the start of finding inner peace in the journey. And it starts small. It may just be 3 breaths in a row, but we get a little bit of a taste. And what kept me coming back on retreats year after year was, well, if that much peace is available, how much more? And every time I would go and find a little more, I'd find there was still more. So I still feel like I'm plumbing the depths of what's possible in this inner peace. This quality of concentration is not something that can be willed. Sometimes when we start meditating, we think, oh, if I can just stop my thoughts from coming, I'll get concentrated. And so we really work to keep from thinking, but that just ties us up in knots. That's not helpful. Concentration can't be forced, can't be willed. But it develops naturally when we're mindful moment after moment for a while. Mindfulness can be intended. You can intend to pay attention, and that's where the instructions start. Come into the present moment, pay attention to your experience. This we can do. This is part of effort. When mindfulness is there, moment after moment for a while, concentration develops naturally. So this is that state of inner peace that opens up from the consistent and steady application of mindfulness. It's a very beautiful, stable, strong, and satisfying way to be. The second path factor I want to talk a little bit about is to do with the wisdom section, and this is right view. In the Pali, it's samaditi. This is the first factor of the Eightfold Path, because we have to start with a little bit of understanding, but then everything else in the path is oriented to come back to this one, because it's really right view that liberates. So concentration is for the purpose of understanding better, which is right view. So this is kind of, this is a word that takes a while to understand, right view. What does it mean? Classically in the text, it's explained as understanding the Four Noble Truths. Four Noble Truths are the core of the Buddha's teachings. And very simply, what the Buddha taught about was the truth that we are in a state of suffering when we come into life, and that there is the possibility of coming to a complete end of the suffering that we find ourselves in. So what the Buddha's whole message is about is suffering and the end of suffering. So the Four Noble Truths are formulated as the truth of suffering, its cause, the possibility of the end of suffering, and the way to the end of suffering. Those are the four truths. Right view is to understand the Buddha's teachings on these four truths. Now, what's interesting is, for years I thought, well, I got it. There's suffering. The cause of suffering is craving. The end of suffering is the end of craving, and the way to that is the Eightfold Path. I got it. I got the Four Noble Truths. What more is there to know? But that's not what the Buddha meant. It's not a conceptual knowing. The Four Noble Truths are calls to action. They are statements of things we need to do to activate the path. So the first noble truth, the call is suffering is to be understood. And that means we need to look into our own life, not run away from what's difficult, not run away from the challenges we meet and the pain that comes, but to meet it, to understand it. Where does that pain come from? As we understand it more and more, we start to lead into the second noble truth. Oh, most of the suffering comes from our own self-centered desires. Most of our unpeaceful states of mind and the inner agitation we feel and the conflict that we get in with others comes from our own self-centered desires. This is what's known as craving. Then we start to explore the third noble truth, which is that when that craving, self-centered desire, is absent, there is a moment of peace. And this moment of peace, in its fullness, is nibbana, is the end of suffering altogether, and that's possible. And then the way that we develop this access to peace and freedom is through the Eightfold Path of wisdom, conduct, and meditation. So, of course, understanding suffering is a big field. We start to look at our life and we see how big the field is. It's wide, but it can be understood. This is from a recent study. According to a study just released by scientists at Duke University, life is too hard. Authors of the 1,200-page study were hesitant to single out any particular factors responsible for making life tough. A surprise, they say, is that they found so many. Before the study was undertaken, researchers had assumed by positive logic that life could not be that bad. As the data accumulated, however, they provided incontrovertible proof that human endurance equals just a tiny fraction of what it should be, given everything it must put up with. 9 out of 10 of the respondents, identified by just their first initials, stated that they would give up completely if they knew how. The remainder also didn't see the point of going on any longer, but still clung to a slight hope for something in the mail. Something in the mail. So, this is kind of a statement of the human condition, isn't it? We run into suffering in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different areas, physical, mental, our own, those we love. And it's a big vision to try to understand that in our direct experience. But this is the first noble truth. This is where the path starts. So these are not just philosophical concepts. They are calls to act. And so when we talk about someone understanding the Four Noble Truths, growing in the Four Noble Truths, maturing in the Four Noble Truths, it means that they have taken the actions specified by each of the Noble Truths, to understand suffering, to abandon its end, and to develop the path to its end. So this is a vast field. Just one other little piece. One of the Buddha's disciples said that there are 2 conditions for the arising of right view. This is what we're talking about, right view of the path. wise attention, is paying attention in a careful way, and hearing someone else. So that means, in a way, right view is contagious. We listen to those who have developed it most fully, and that's how we get it. So this is why an enterprise like Insight San Diego is so important, because we need to have access to others who are walking the path, have walked the path, and have sharing amongst us all, what have we seen of the Four Noble Truths? What have we seen of the path? This is how right view spreads. This is how we acquire it, by listening, by paying attention, and by developing it ourselves. So these are the two paths of Buddhist practice toward normal human happiness, with the cultivation of generosity, conduct, loving kindness, and the path to liberation based on the development of tranquility, sort of exemplified by the factor of concentration, and based on the development of insight, exemplified by the development of right view. So that's the Dharma that I wanted to talk with you about tonight. We'll have a little bit of time for discussion. And I also wanted to say a little about how the offering from Insight San Diego is organized, in case this is your first time or you haven't understood before. So Insight San Diego operates on the principle of generosity, meaning that you weren't charged to come here, right? Glad I got that right. And yet this facility costs money. And the way that it is compensated is that at the end of the evening, each of you is invited to leave a contribution to help Insight San Diego continue to put on the programs that they put on. So having speakers and having this as a meeting space is accomplished only through the generosity of the Sangha. And the beautiful thing about working in this way is there's no barrier to entry. There's no admission fee, so it's open to everybody. We want it to be an experience that such that there is no financial barrier to coming and receiving the teachings. And the way that we have found we can do that is to operate on the principle of generosity, of dana. A number of retreat centers in the West work in this way, and Insight San Diego works in this way. It's a beautiful model and a beautiful approach. But it only works when there is that generous response to support the activities of the Sangha. So I hope that each of you will consider that. There will be a basket. Is it at the back, Albie?
Yes, right behind Ralph.
Yeah, great. Right at the back of the room to support Insight San Diego. And there is another basket, which is donations, if you'd like, to support the teacher. So that will generally be the way that Insight San Diego operates when a teacher is present. There will be a dana basket for Insight San Diego to cover the facility, and a dana basket for offerings for the teacher. Most of my income from teaching meditation comes from generosity, comes from dana. It is a beautiful practice in its own right, and it's also helping to support a whole network of Vipassana teachers in California and across the country. So if you feel inclined in that direction, there's also a basket for me. But there's no pressure, because I had a very nice meal offered to me tonight, and I don't have to go out with my begging bowl.
Or your robes.
Or my robes. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share this evening. We have a few more minutes if there are comments, questions, discussion. I'll be.
This seems, well, I won't apologize for the question. I want to. But
Yeah.
do you know people who have reached liberation? Are there many of them or very few of them?
It's a fair question. It's a very good question because we talk about it all the time. If we had had another 10 minutes tonight, I was going to read you an account of someone who achieved liberation several years ago in Thailand. So I don't know any Westerners who have, but I have met some Asian teachers who I was told had. And from what I could see of them, I couldn't discount that. So in our lineage, Mahasi Sayadaw, who was the Burmese master who basically created the main outline of the meditation instructions that we use, was considered to be fully liberated. Many people considered Ajahn Chah to be fully liberated, the Thai teacher who was Jack Kornfield's first teacher. And the really inspiring passage that I would have read if we'd had more time was Ajahn Liam, who was Ajahn Chah's successor. And he has a short autobiography that's up on the web. He actually called himself, or they called him Lung Pa Liam, which in Thai means spiritual father. And he basically describes his own liberation. I knew Deepa Ma reasonably well, and she was considered to be at a stage, there are different gradations of liberation. She was considered to be at a stage of liberation that had let go of both sense desire and aversion.
Who was it?
Deepa Ma. She was a Bengali woman who was an early teacher to Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg. And she came over to IMS and taught in the early 1980s. I spent a month with her, taking care of her. You could just feel in her presence, she was a very highly realized being. There's a beautiful book about her, if you're interested, called Deepa Ma, D-I-P-A-M-A. One of the most inspiring women teachers in our lifetimes. So
Can I ask a second question?
Sure.
You know, kind of given that number, kind of makes sense to go for normal happiness.
The thing is, could everybody hear the question, comment? The thing is that once you reach the base of normal happiness, there are many grades above that before liberation that unfold through the factors of the Eightfold Path. So, for instance, the fulfillment of concentration through the development of what are known as the jhanas is a greater happiness than normal human happiness. And along the way, there are these very sublime states that open through the development of the Eightfold Path that way surpass normal human happiness. And those are not just limited to Asian masters. The very Western teachers that you know and love have some familiarity with those states. So greater happinesses are definitely possible and available to us in this very life. Yeah. Yes?
I'm starting to work on the stage that you talked about, like allowing, it can feel so intense. And when I do this, I don't know, I back up. I mean, do you have any suggestion on?
Suffering is something I think it has to be approached in a moderated way. There is definitely suffering that can be too overwhelming for us to establish a mindful or wise relationship to it. And so the amount of intensity that we can establish a good relationship to grows as we develop stronger qualities of mindfulness and concentration. And we're then better able to be with the more intense experiences. But for all of us, there's a limit beyond which the mindfulness can't keep up with the intensity of the pain. Then all we can really do is be as compassionate to ourselves as possible until the suffering dials down a little bit. But what you want to be exploring, I think, are the areas where it's challenging but not overwhelming. And I think that's where the greatest amount of learning comes. So find where the edge is and play there, recognizing that sometimes it's going to go beyond that, and you can't really work skillfully meditatively at that point, but you will extend where that edge is as you work little by little with it. The other thing you can do after a time of feeling somewhat overwhelmed is go back and review it. And the memory of the experience will have a lot of the essence of it without all the overwhelm. So then you can actually recall it, go into it a little bit. If it feels overwhelming, back off, drop it. But you can learn from it just from the memory of that experience. And that's doable. Yeah. Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned jhana practice, and I was wondering, do you think that it's possible to go beyond what would be considered normal human happiness, to go toward liberation without jhana practice? Is jhana practice an essential part of that path?
No, it's not. There are passages in the ancient texts that talk about people who have become fully enlightened without going through jhana practice. And so a lot of the benefits of the higher stages of the path are available without jhana. Yeah. Yes?
When a person becomes fully enlightened, is there no backsliding? Is there...
So basically, when a person becomes fully enlightened, the way that it's said in the text, the forces of greed, hatred, and delusion, which are called the roots of the unwholesome. In other words, all the unwholesome states of mind, all the unwholesome acts of speech and body are based in those forces. They're gone. So there is no more potential for suffering in such a person. Now, does such a person always manifest the best judgment in all situations and circumstances, regardless of culture? Not necessarily. It's interesting. There was a great teacher who was, again, reputed to be an arhat, a fully awakened being in Thailand, who got very involved in a political question of his time, having to do with the currency and the money system. And he was doing some things that a lot of us thought were a little strange. But I don't think it came out of greed, and I don't think it came out of hatred, and I don't think it came out of confusion. I think it came out of his not understanding the monetary system very well. But the understanding is that someone who has really reached that level of liberation doesn't have the seeds of unwholesome action any longer. But I think this is a good test. In other words, if you see someone who's claiming to be at that level, but you're still seeing unwholesome mind states or activities, then maybe they're not at that point. And there is also it's also true that insight can reach a depth of understanding, but it's extremely pure in that, it's completely pure in that moment, but it may not yet have done the work of uprooting completely those forces of unwholesomeness in the mind. So sometimes someone will have an interim kind of enlightenment experience and even float in that, opening and the wonder of it for a while, and you don't see any impurity, but the others, the impurities have not yet been eliminated. So they may themselves think that they've reached the end of the road, but they may not have. Take one more question and then
I just have a practical question.
Yes.
I've been involved in Advaita Vedanta for many, many years.
Mhm.
I've just started meditating, and here's what I noticed, that two things happen. The body just sort of disappears, and there's a sense of color and a sense of almost like gently falling. And then there's a feeling of needing or wanting to move. And it doesn't feel like the person is needing or wanting to move. So here's my question. Is it better to just sort of keep the sitting going, or is it fine to get up and start walking?
How long would you have been sitting for when that experience happened?
15 minutes.
My main advice in questions like this is to try it both ways. But I would definitely explore extending your sitting period You're comfortable sitting? There's not body
I
discomfort,
am,
right?
but I'd say generally in life I'm moving, I like to move, so it just that much sitting. It doesn't feel like, it's not exactly a problem in that there's any suffering. It's just an impulse.
So sometimes let yourself do it.
Okay.
Other times resist it
Okay.
and see what happens. And I would definitely experiment with trying 30-minute sits at times, and if that's comfortable, extending longer until it becomes physically uncomfortable, at least.
Okay.
Play with it, and you'll see.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, so we need to wrap up for tonight. Albie, any final words of parting or wisdom or?
Thank you very much, guys, for being here and for your words of wisdom. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
And thank all of you for being here and being part of Insight San Diego. And remember Guy's words about generosity. Appreciate it.
Nice to see you all this evening. Yeah, hope to see you again.